I don't know how you're defining a movement. If the alt-right wasn't a movement, I don't know. I mean, what was it? I mean, maybe I'm being defensive. It definitely felt like I was part of something at the time.
Well, what do you reckon to that? I thought that was really good. Yeah, I think some people were like, "Oh, how long is it?" I thought it was a great video, really well put together. It was very engaging. Liam Porter's also done other projects, other like documentaries. So they've done, playlists about alt-right stuff. Gamergate documentary here. This one we just watched. Yeah, go and check the stuff out if you want more long-form documentaries. I know, it's crazy how little views it's got. This is something that I think is one of those things that you would think deserves like more views. Do you know what I mean? Right, I just need to. I'll be back in a sec, okay? And then we're going to pull the person that made it in, Liam Porter, okay? If you want to speak to him about the documentary, ask a question, something like that, feel free to hop in the green room, and I'll pull you in after I've spoken
really
to him for a bit, okay?
Brought
hey,
back so many memories.
Thank you for the bits, appreciate it. Right, we'll be back in a sec.
To Chud Nation.
Okay, let's bring in Liam Porter. Liam Porter.
Hello there. Long-time listener, first-time caller.
Can't hear you, but it might be my end. Yes, it's probably my end. Right, that should be better.
Oh.
Hello.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you. How's it going?
Great. Am I live?
You're live. Sorry, yes, to be clear, we're live right now. So don't swear. Well, you can swear, but just don't say the N-word, okay?
Okay, I promise.
Okay, good stuff.
Yeah, long-time listener, first-time caller. Very excited to be calling in.
Yeah, well, I mean, listen, I appreciate you sending me this to look at. I'm sorry that I didn't get a chance to look at the pre-cut, but I mean, this has worked out quite well because I got to watch it on the stream fresh and give my fresh reaction. So, yeah. First of all, yeah, I think it was... Well, actually, first of all, do you want to just introduce yourself so people know who you are and where they can find you?
Yeah, so my name is Liam Porter. I'm a YouTuber. I make documentaries about the alt-right and Gamergate and these sort of subcultures online of an alt-right persuasion. The first one I made was about Sam Hyde and his so-called feud with Tim Heidecker. The second one was about a guy called Michael who got involved with the Gamergate movement. And this latest one, as you've seen, is Whovian Woes, about a figure known as Millennial Woes of the alt-right in Britain. And you can find my work on YouTube. Just look for my name, Liam Porter.
Brilliant. Okay. Yeah. I mean, one thing I want to ask straight away is, so you mentioned you seem to have an interest in like the alt-right. What got you into that aspect in particular?
Good question. I think it all began when, around the year 2014 or so, I moved abroad to work as an English teacher, and I didn't have a TV in the flat. It was a small flat, but I did have an internet connection. And so I started watching YouTube as a complete replacement for TV, watching everything that was on YouTube. And at that point, in that year, a big topic was Gamergate. So I began to watch all the Gamergaters, get into all the details of Gamergate. And over the years, from 2014 to, say, 17, a lot of those same people became alt-right. And so, yeah, it kind of came from a overdependence on YouTube, I would say, at a formative time in my life.
Okay, that's interesting. I mean, were you in a position where the ideas, like, were you ever convinced by the ideas? Did you ever have like an alt-right period or something like that?
Good question. I would say part of me thought they were onto something.
Okay.
Not race. Not race. I am half Chinese.
Okay.
I'm a product of a mixed race coupling, so I could hardly ever be a white nationalist. So for me, yeah, I kind of thought maybe they have a point. Maybe liberalism is the enemy. Maybe all these things we're told are good and fair and nice are actually just illusions. Perhaps we're all just saying these things because they're nice and not because they're true. Maybe society is not going to last. And I think at that point in my life, I was younger. I was more financially insecure, personally insecure. My interpretation is that my sympathy for these sort of fringe movements came from a sense that I was fringe myself.
Right, okay. And that's interesting. I don't know, because I mean, I don't know how intentional it was, but I certainly came away with this. But when I first started watching it, I guess because I can connect somewhat with Millennial Woes experience, as we've got like some similarity in background somewhere, right? And it just felt like this could have been me, because I was interested in this stuff as well. And I obviously I've wanted to be a content creator really for probably a couple of years now. And there's like a universe where I could have been like an alt-right YouTuber, or I could have been like a skeptic YouTuber that went alt-right or something like that, you know? So I don't know how intentional that was, but to me it seemed like there was some element there of, it felt like you were putting in there, and it felt like it's something someone could connect with if they've got the right experience to do so. Like, it felt like it's like, in my mind, this could potentially be anyone with a similar background. Like, no one's immune to this route, potentially. I mean, I don't know if that was an intentional thing, but...
Yeah. I think it's interesting how BreadTube came out of the alt-right in a sense that people empowered themselves to be a public speaker on politics. And one was a reaction to the other, I find interesting, because perhaps people just go where the audience is, where the audience that finds them, they pull them in that direction. Perhaps Colin Robertson was made into Millennial Woes by his audience.
Actually, that's another interesting point, because you seem to put quite heavy at the start in that he was like talking about Doctor Who, right? And then you just notice this turn, and it's like there's a very jarring moment where he's talked about Doctor Who and how much he loves Doctor Who, and there's this moment, and it's almost like a kid finding an old toy that they're embarrassed about, and they find something on there that then links to the audience. Doctor Who, look at the Black Maid. Oh, disgusting. And it's quite a jarring moment, and I think it did really well to demonstrate that shift from almost like a childlike interest in discussing something they're passionate about to fuck this woke shit to feed into the audience. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. So he is a Whovian, I think it's quite clear. But he denies he's a Whovian to this day. The reason he denies it is to be seen in the clip later in the film, where he's talking about how they're all Guardian readers with their stupid frilly scarves, and they just like these nice answers. They just cower, they're cowards. So I see in that video he uploaded, which was called The Smugness of the Whovian Liberal, him reacting against his own liberalism and his own liberal-mindedness earlier in life, his own Whovianism, because anyone who's a fan of Doctor Who knows it's a very liberal-minded show.
Yeah, definitely. And because obviously, when he was younger, clearly he connected with that and connected with those narratives and connected with like the liberal aspect of it. And he said himself he's a liberal, right? But it's like his rejection of Doctor Who is a rejection of that politicized mind that he had as well as he moved further right, it seems.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I do think that He felt secure in that identity of being a liberal. He was going to art school. He was a Doctor Who fan. He loved classic TV and films and so on. There's some plane noise. So
That's okay. So no, it's all good. You're still coming through.
it's all good. Yep. So he had that identity, but when he went on the dole and that turned into a 10-year ordeal, he couldn't really cling to that identity anymore. So he was in a position in life where he needed a new identity, and this alt-right movement came along just at that point in his life.
Yeah, definitely. So one thing I noted is that I couldn't really get a read on, which to me is a sign of a fairly reasonable, as unbiased as possible documentary. I couldn't get a read on like what your perspective was on things that happened to him. So I'd be interested to ask you here, what are your thoughts on the most kind of, I guess, fundamental part of his growth initially when he was doxxed by the newspapers?
Welcome
what do you think
to Chud Nation.
about that?
What do I think? I think that emboldened him at a point where he could have turned back to his normal life and just forsaken the channel. Or he could have done what he did, which is to become emboldened in the Millennial Woes persona and go touring with it, make a career of it, all these things he did, make his social network consist of alt-right people, which is what happened. So I think that was the point of no return. That's my read on that situation. What do I think about the journalists who wrote the headlines? I think they write in that way about all objectionable people. From the public's point of view, they use the word vile. It's a sort of style guide thing, I imagine. I think Colin took it much more personally than the journalist writing it.
So, sure, I guess for the journalist, they're just writing an article. Like they probably don't have like a super high amount of political investment. They're probably just writing an article to fill up a place that needs to be filled. And this is like a kind of somewhat interesting story to do. But I guess, okay, what I would ask though is like, and this I guess is a broader question. When it comes to like the alt-right, what kind of view do you ascribe to? Like, do you think that there's some things, some strategies like say doxing that should be off the table regardless of the person? Do you think maybe sometimes doxing is okay? Do you think Colin Robertson represented something that justified his doxing, if that makes sense?
Oh, right. Well, the last question's the easiest to answer. Yeah, I think it does justify what's called doxing, that is newspaper articles written about you. I see it this way. You reach a certain level of notoriety, people are aware of you, and they naturally want to understand where you're coming from. Well, of course, from the point of view of Colin, it's an attack, but I see it as reporting on what's going on in the world, and it's a tabloid newspaper, so it takes a tabloid tone. There's also other articles about him in broadsheet papers in which they're much more objective. Of course, the tabloid ones really stung. Vile vlogger, and so on.
See, that's interesting because I had an instantaneous, like, negative reaction to it, the doxing. I didn't like it. Someone in my chat said, you know, what about the public good? And I think that it is a good point. And it's like, from the outcome, I can say that the paper was stupid to do it. Obviously, we didn't know that at the time. I guess my issue is, where do we draw the line on that? When is someone entitled to anonymity versus when is someone fairly at risk of the papers looking into them and you know, doxing their information and whatnot? Because I don't think like a 50 sub YouTuber should be doxed by the papers, right?
If they're in a position to be doxed, said something that can be interpreted as in a danger, proposing a danger to the public. Usually that's what happened with Millennial Woes, with the presumption that his rhetoric was so hateful that it would increase the chances of hate crimes, for example.
Well, I guess my concern there then would be that, do we just say that if someone's rhetoric is dangerous enough, we are saying that the papers have got, you know, free reign to dox them and publicize them to you know, the world or wherever it may go?
Well, I think if it's what you're saying, if what one is saying is so rhetorically outrageous that it makes the news and people read that as news, then it's fair game.
That's interesting.
They have given 2 gift subs in the channel.
Yeah, okay. I think, I mean, we don't need to like debate this point endlessly. I think we probably have got some disagreement somewhere. But I do see, I think that I think what I'd probably say is there's probably a level that someone could reach where what they're saying is so crazy that possibly it could become then a public good to report it or public information, you know? But I think that that's got to be balanced with a look at an assessment of how big they are. Because I also think if someone's got like a tiny YouTube channel, does blowing them up and broadcasting them, even if they are saying egregious things, would that actually hinder, or would it just end up helping? Because you then end up broadcasting them further to the world. And if you look at what happened with Millennial Woes, you know, do that to someone much smaller, 50 people are watching them, all of a sudden the newspapers are talking about them. Like, even from a pragmatic concern, maybe it might be a mistake to talk about it, even if they've got egregious views. I don't know.
That's fair.
Well, listen, we can agree to disagree. I don't want to like endlessly debate it, right? Like, I'm just interested in your view, and I got your view. But sorry, what did you want to say?
I guess in the end, I just wanted to say, when it comes to doxing, the question is, does the doxing cause the increase in viewers? Yes, short term, but I think long term, the papers are always late to catch up with whatever's happening. I mean, I personally knew about the alt-right long before the newspapers were onto it. I say with some pride. So I thought they were late to the party to be reporting on the alt-right and what it was, because it's quite newsworthy. A far-right insurgent movement which is entirely online and which is done entirely with pseudonyms. And I think it was underreported on for a while.
Yeah, sure, okay. Okay, and yeah, so going back to the documentary, so then obviously there was this period, and it's funny because I was sort of like more on the anti-SJW side, but I reached a point where I didn't really agree with like the extremities of what Millennial Woes was saying. But I remember, and I think one of the graphics in your video is from this video that I remember seeing, and it was very dramatic, and it was dramatic music, and it just showed this line of his subscribers going up as he showed all these headlines, and he was like, you know, come at me, bitch, basically, come at me again, you've made me grow. And it kind of, I just think that it's easy to look back now and see what a mistake it was. But, I mean, Jesus, what a fucking gift that was given to this guy, because he was able to use this to essentially paint himself as a victim of an extremely egregious act and grow enormously from it, right? Yeah.
Oh, yeah, definitely. In the short term, the media wanted to chase him away from this movement. They failed. And I think they probably did want... That's what happens a lot. They expose an alt-righter in the news, and then that person is never to be heard of again. But with Millennial Woes, he was made of sterner stuff, and he turned it into a career. It was, to a certain extent, amorally courageous of him.
What, you mean Millennial Woes was morally courageous to
well, not to just hide. You could have just deleted the channel.
Oh, I see what you mean. Okay, yeah, sure. No, that's a very Giga Chad take. I think this guy's morally courageous, and yeah, I agree with you. Like, yeah, as abhorrent as his views are, yeah, like it is a courageous thing to go, well, fuck this, I'm going to become a massive figure, right?
I think that's what makes it narratively interesting, that he makes that leap, and that more things happen in his career on the alt-right.
Yeah, definitely. Because I think you're right. I think a lot of people feel pressure to, you know, end their channel. And then obviously you've got this thing where he really capitalizes and these people are talking about him. He then ends up making these connections and, you know, speaking at all these crazy shows. You know, these crazy, like not shows, but, you know, conferences and stuff like that. Which is exposure he probably could only have dreamed of before this issue with the paper, right?
Yeah, I think that we all crave recognition, especially YouTubers. I'm a YouTuber, so I can relate. And so the pure recognition, it didn't matter who it came from, really. So if it came from someone like Mike Pinovich of the Daily Shower podcast, alt-right podcast, and they invited him on, then, well, great. He'd go on it and he'd be happy for the recognition because they were telling him, yes, you're right, papers are wrong, you're right, and we're part of a movement that's going to change the world.
Yeah, and another thing to note as well is like there was a clip from a Count Dankula video. And one thing I noted, I think maybe we were trying to get across, it felt like what was happening, based on what I've seen here, is some of these alt-right figures or centre-right people, through their pursuit and passion of free speech, were giving cover to like some of the extremities of this person's views.
Oh yeah,
Right?
I think that's absolutely what happened. Yes, can be seen in that Count Dankula video, can be seen in the career of Lauren Chen, who was alt-right for a while before she then started broadcasting to a wider conservative Republican audience. That's roaming millennial, Lauren Chen. And Lauren Southern. She never went all out, yes, I'm alt-right, yes, I only care about white people, but she's flirted with the alt-right more than any other alt-right figure.
Mm. Definitely, and you know, we don't need to go down to the Lauren Southern rabbit hole by any means, but the interesting thing with Lauren Southern is she's flirted with that concept, but also she herself has said some things which are very questionable, like there was that Dave Rubin appearance where she talked about how the Canadian Nazi Party was allegedly set up by Jewish people, I think was the thing she did. And she used to play this game. I think she doesn't play it as much anymore, but still got some pernicious views. But it would be like saying something that's kind of edging towards the Nazi takes and then pulling it back a bit, you know, and just dancing across that line as and when required to, you know, perpetuate itself in the right audience, right?
I think this is slightly. I think this is very important for the part of the film dealing with the white Sharia meme, because you have to ask, why were they so angry with her specifically when she was not part of the alt-right? Well, she was so close to the alt-right. I think it really upset them that she danced around that line, and she wouldn't have the, as they would see it, courage in her. She wouldn't have the courage in her convictions to go all out. 1488.
Okay. So then obviously he has his kind of meteoric rise, you know, and then obviously we get this kind of links in, I guess, to the aspect of the women. And he kind of, you know, and to be fair, like it is, I think, and he says about how it's cowardly to ignore it. He took what I would refer to as another morally courageous act. He defended women within the alt-right. Like, that's pretty bold. Like, I don't know.
You have to adjust your baseline a little bit if you're watching a film like this, where it's composed of the material that they made on the alt-right. So yeah, from the baseline of alt-right morality, then he was taking a courageous moral stand, because it did result in blowback for him, getting called a mangina and so on, losing credibility, and it did actually have repercussions later, years later, that he had many enemies within the movement who thought he took the wrong side during that whole white Sharia meme. Actually, yeah, they thought that he was in the wrong even 2 years later, and they were happy to see his downfall.
Yeah, well, you know, this is actually, it made me think about kind of modern, because obviously in like lefty circles and progressive circles, there is this ironic misogyny that exists, that you know, there's a discussion and discourse about and whatnot. And it's just, it's funny to watch the alt-right do it. And it's like, but they're not joking. They're serious. They'd be happy if that happened, right?
Right. Where instead of being mostly a joke, a little bit serious, it was mostly serious, a little bit of a joke.
Yes.
The intention with all of those memes was basically to say, okay, women, you can stick around in our Discord servers. Yeah, you can laugh along with us, but we're the ones making the memes. You're the ones repeating the memes. And if you ever into a relationship with us, then we're quite serious about, let's say, traditional gender roles. The man dominates the woman, and the woman accepts what the man says.
Yeah, for sure. So you obviously touched on that in the video, but there was quite a big backlash against this from what you say then as well, for Millennial Woes.
Oh yeah, it made him lose a lot of credibility in the movement. One of the people who was on the other side of the white Sharia thought wars was a young Nicolas Fuentes, who is in the news in this side of Twitter recently,
yes,
with his Destiny streams. And I find it just absolutely mind-blowing for someone who saw him on streams at the time. Just a little kid, didn't seem to really know what he was saying, just repeating what his online big brothers had told him, fed him, that his position during that whole discourse on the alt-right is something he's stuck to, like a solid principle, a principled person. He, at that point, was an incel who hated women and wanted to exclude them from politics, and he's stuck by that line for years and years, and only grown and grown, and is now, seemingly a domesticated figure.
Yeah, for sure. And I noticed, I think Nick Fuentes was talking to Roosh V, which is another. And this is what I liked about the video, is it's like, because I've obviously been following this for years. I'm like, oh, I remember this person. I remember that person. It's like a fucking trip down memory lane, you know? And it's, I think
Yeah.
if you know about the history, that you get something out of that. And it's kind of, in a wrong way maybe, but it's fun because you're like, I remember all these people. Wow, you know?
Everything's connected, I think.
Yeah.
Gamergate, alt-right, the manosphere. There's really no fine lines between them, or whatever the phrase is.
Yeah, definitely. And this is why, like, so for example, there was a recent panel where Nick Fuentes went on with Sneeko, and I think that was surprising to some people that Sneeko and Nick Fuentes would end up on doing content together. But then you think, as you've just said, red pill manosphere alt-right is like there's a very thin line between those two groups, and sometimes they flirt with each other a lot and sometimes they cross over. So if you know about the history of these kind of movements, it's actually very common that red pillars would blend together with alt-righters and stuff. Like Davis Arini's a great example of someone who bounced between the two, you know, and it's, you know, very common because I think once you're on board with some of the red pill arguments, you're really primed for the stuff the alt-right then give you, and it's easy to kind of move over in that direction, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Orini's a good example because he had a big part to play in Gamergate, making
Yes.
a quote-unquote documentary about Anita Sarkeesian. He was also in lots of alt-right circles, and he was a proponent of neo-reaction, which was a proto-alt-right philosophy.
That's interesting as well, because when I think of like the neo-reactionary movement now, the NRX, I think they're called, I think of like Twitter intellectuals, you know, and people talking about like Moldbug and stuff like that. And it's like, it's funny how that movement's developed from someone like Davis Arini, who I think someone like H Bomber Guy showed to be just a kind of lolcow, really, in some of his videos. And now you've got these kind of like very, very kind of self-important thinkers on Twitter speaking about this neo-reactionary stuff. I don't know if that's something you've noted.
Kind of surprise you. Actually, Curtis Yarvin, aka Moldbug, he's from way back. He was blogging in those days. He didn't appear on camera, but he was neo-reaction, really.
Yeah,
and people
yeah.
like Davis Arini latched onto him.
Wow. Oh, really? Wow. I didn't realize that. That's interesting. Yeah. Because the thing is, I never really watched like lots of Davis Arini's work by myself, because I only found out about it from H Bomber Guy because I was more of like a Sargonite kind of person, right? And I think I found out about it after the failure of like when Anita Sarkeesian documentary just went down the toilet, and I think a lot of the alt-light types of people disregarded him because they thought it was a joke. I think is if I'm remembering correctly.
Yeah, he also had what's the word? A disowning. There was some big moment where all the alt-right figures decided that this was the time to lay into him, to kick him out of the movement. He always hung around afterwards, but his credibility went down a lot. Same kind of thing happened to Colin in a small form when he took the side of the women, which was an unpopular argument. That was the Bolshevik argument, the minority. And then later, of course, with the sexual abuse scandal, his reputation took a big dip.
Well, yeah. So, I mean, I think that's probably quite an interesting way to get to the next part, and it's the kind of contrast, right? Because he went from defending women, and the final note I'll make on that is, it's funny how it seems that in the video, even though he's defending women, it's like impossible to remove the misogyny from what he's saying, because he says at the end, like, oh, I think it's sexy when women copy our views, right? And it's like, Jesus.
We need them there. They need to be doing this important job, and it's good that they're the ones who are just repeating what we've said, what
the men say. Yeah, yeah. But yeah, that's interesting. But then obviously it's like he went from this stalwart defense of women to having these allegations come out about him, which like seemed somewhat credible. Like, I don't know exactly what he was accused of specifically, but at one point he talked about how he was perhaps coercive in a sexual encounter, right? So can you kind of flesh out a bit more, like any more details about how that sort of played out?
I have to be super careful. I'm speaking live.
Okay.
There are real people involved in this.
Sure.
I was trying to keep it super dry and stuff factual. He had a short-lived relationship with a woman who attended a patriotic alternative conference. That's basically an alt-right conference, and was a member of this patriotic alternative movement. He says it was basically a matter of miscommunication, that she thought there was a relationship in this, and he was sure that there wasn't. There was he says it was a consensual sexual encounter after one of these conferences, and she later said that during that encounter he was coercive to her in making of some sexual act. God, where am I going with this? It all blew up because she leaked her chats with the Patriotic Alternative group, and if you read the words uncharitably, it looks as if Colin admits to being coercive. He does literally admit to it. But his explanation afterwards was that he was trying to look after her feelings and concede to her in what was a very emotional state for her. So he was saying, yes, dear, yes, dear. There's so little evidence on this. It's so difficult to say much about it because we don't have her side of it. What we do know is that she never went to the police with it, and the fact that she never went to the police with it was enough for, I'd say, most in the movement to say, well, that was a bunch of nothing. At the end of the film, in the epilogue, you see Mark Collette, leader of Patriotic Alternative, was in the way of evidence on screen.
Right, sure. So, if you don't want to answer because you're concerned, that's fine. I think I just want to clarify something because I think I understand where you're coming from. So, the coerciveness that's discussed is a coerciveness in terms of millennial Woes is acting or presenting the idea that they're in more of a relationship than he truly believes they are in order to have a sexual encounter with this person.
Yeah, that is how I read it. Yeah.
Okay. Because I read some of the messages, and my immediate reaction, which is probably rooted in some bias, was kind of, oh yeah, this looks pretty bad. But yeah, I'm the kind of person that I'd want to see all the logs and analyze them all before I really give a firm idea, of what's going on. And I think it's interesting, and this is something else I wanted to bring to you as well, because to me, the response is what I would expect from like the left when you see these kind of allegations that are a bit non-committal and it's not rape, but maybe something happened that wasn't quite right, and it's like people call it rape or sexual harassment, but that probably is too excessive. It's like we kind of want a word to describe it that isn't that extreme. What was interesting though is it seemed like the righties did what I would expect the left to do and basically cancelled him over these logs. What's the dynamic there?
I think it's pure opportunism on the behalf of his enemies, that they would normally not really care about allegations like this. They'd handwave someone like Rouge V, who's very influential on the alt-right, would just handwave these allegations no matter where they came from. But in this case, he had real political enemies on the alt-right, and they wanted to propagate this quote-unquote evidence, a lot of it very dubious. And so, yeah, pure opportunism, I would say.
That's interesting. That's actually okay, because one thing I've been talking about today, because I am kind of skeptical. I think that if a structural entity of power, removes you from a platform, that's, something that can harm you. But it feels like sometimes with these deplatformings or people getting cancelled, etc., it's not like the left that really does it in a meaningful way. It's like there's some sort of mistake or error that's made that's capitalized upon by people within the right. And Milo's an example of this, where these conversations about pedophilia came up and his CPAC speech got cancelled. And it feels like this is the same thing, where there's these messages that have come out, and it's nothing really to do with the left. It's that the right are capitalizing on this kind of mistake, I guess, that Millennial Woes has made, to cancel him for their own selfish benefit and ends. You know, I don't know. That was
Right. Well, it's a win-win situation. Well, a win-win-lose situation. Obviously, Colin loses his reputation, but it's a win for the people who are covering it, who have some content for that day on the alt-right. The ones who are non-committal, yeah, okay, well, let's cover this. And then it's a win for his enemies, who put this stuff out there in order to damage him because they didn't like him, because they were opposed to, for example, his position on the woman question. And some people on the alt-right didn't like the fact that he was so positive towards National Socialism.
Ah, right, okay. So yeah, he was, you know, more aligned. Well, maybe today he'd be aligned with someone like Haas from Infrared or Jackson Hinkle, perhaps. That would be an interesting thing to see, if that was his take. Okay. Yeah, so obviously there was this kind of cancellation that occurred, and his reputation was in tatters. And the impression I got from the documentary was that he kind of made a few kind of attempts, or maybe he kind of accepted that things were over and done with. But before his YouTube channel got banned, it seemed like he did this millennial thing. Do you think that was an effort to like reinvigorate his channel, or do you think that was more of a, well, I'll do this once a year for the hell of it type situation?
Oh, can I surprise you? Millennial Woes has never taken a year off. Millennial has never taken a year off. That means that from 2014, I believe, till 2021, there's been a millennial each and every year. And so he never took a break, even in that year in which the sexual abuse allegations came out. He disappeared for a long while, and then he popped up back out of nowhere with Millennial 2020. And he was generally accepted back into the fold of the movement.
That's interesting. And I'm sure that this Mark Collette situation did I would imagine that at least somewhat helped his reputation if that was rescinded, did it? Or
yeah, he still has his hardcore audience on Telegram and Odyssey, which is smaller than the YouTube heydays, but still sizable, a fan base of several thousand. And they listen in every week to a show called A Gram of Woes. Gram of Woes, and that is basically a call-in show where he answers questions. And he's done that weekly since he came back with Millennial 2020.
Okay. Damn. I mean, this I get because you mentioned, this is another thing I wanted to talk about too. You mentioned obviously his YouTube channel got banned in 2021. Now, I guess I'll just ask broadly, what's your take on the efficacy of deplatforming?
I think it was a changing attitude on YouTube between 2010 to 2020. 2010, YouTube was part of the Silicon Valley libertarian attitude towards censorship, which was that you let everything just flourish and good ideas rise to the top. Then over the course of the last decade, there was a new kind of terrorism, violence, which was associated with the alt-right. Not new, I mean, there were far-right terrorists in the past, but this was new because it was the alt-right. It was something new. It was on YouTube specifically. As Colin said, the alt-right couldn't really have existed without YouTube. And so I would say that the change from 2010, when it was very libertarian and free speech, free market of ideas, to 2020, where it looks out for these controversial accounts with what are deemed dangerous ideas, is that they reacted to what actually happened in that decade.
Sure. So, I mean, for you personally, do you think that do you think deplatforming is effective or good, or do you think?
Oh, I see. Simple question. Well, I think it is good. I think Because YouTube is a place you go for entertainment and not just to benefit someone and their YouTube channel. Like, I don't believe that an individual with a channel has a right to say, this is my channel, you must host my content, you must personally enrich me. YouTube is for entertainment. That's what it wants you to think of when you go to it. And they definitely don't want it to be a place where you slowly radicalize yourself with fringe content. So I just intuitively understand it. If I had something like YouTube, if I owned a company like YouTube, I would want to curate the experience of the users. I might want to exclude certain kinds of content. So what I think happened is that over time they realized that content wasn't the problem. They'd be getting content all they wanted. They could remove people's monetization in a heavy-handed way and they'd still have content. They had enough content. And the fringe content, the free speech content was causing them a lot of problems in the press and making people associate YouTube with PewDiePie more than fun stuff, baking, sports, light entertainment. And so that's the direction they went in, and I see nothing wrong with it.
Sure. I mean, again, I don't want to necessarily get into a big old debate about platforming. I think that I agree. There's probably there's some lines you can draw, and people that say, oh, anything should be allowed. I mean, obviously, like illegal content shouldn't be allowed, and there's probably some extremist stuff. And in order for me to make money from YouTube, I have to rely on them to keep it an advertiser-friendly platform. So by its nature, that involves removing stuff that isn't going to be advertiser-friendly, and I kind of rely on that relationship to make money. I guess my concern is that sometimes it feels like we're kind of in this era now where it's not just you have a TOS. If you follow the TOS, which is based partly on advertiser guidelines and advertiser friendliness, but if you follow the TOS, you can stay on, you can monetize, etc. If you don't follow the TOS, you're at risk of your channel going. And I thought that was a pretty reasonable way of doing it. Yeah. But sometimes I'm just worried that are we moving to an era where YouTube are making these kind of unilateral decisions, even or any platform outside of their proposed TOS, in order to make politically expedient decisions that are not rooted in any groundwork they laid out about what you can and can't do. Like, that's the concern for me, I guess, is what I'm saying.
If I get where you're coming from, then I would agree with it to an extent. I would say you're making the argument that we need a public square of sorts, and people should have a right to have their say in their corner of the internet. Well, is that what you're saying?
Sure. I think we can agree reasonable boundaries, but we all need to know what the boundaries are. And I think there needs to be maximum transparency so that if someone breaks the rules, it's here's the specific provision that was broken. And if someone's just uploading a video of them saying the N-word, I mean, whatever. I'm not expecting them to lay that out to me. But I think if prominent figures are getting banned, I think that at the very least, YouTube could at least give us some insight into, like Twitter did it with Trump. And I thought that was great. I thought that was a good step forward to more transparency in how they operate and how they think. And I just think that if someone does get banned, they should be able to strongly justify it using terms of service, because that's what they've set up to govern what is and isn't allowed on the website.
I really feel for creators who are unfairly banned. So sometimes they're targeted by people who don't like them, and systems like Twitch and YouTube, they just can't respond to the amount of people asking them, what's going on with this? What's going on with this? So without massive expenditure, customer service people, they really can't address it. It's like a mathematical problem or something. You've got so many users and some proportion are going to complain. How are you going to deal with that? I think that maybe they should do that. Hire more people explicitly to talk to creators one-on-one and build a better relationship, because it's been going on for absolutely ages that creators have been shafted by the platforms that host them, and they have no recourse. And only if they get to a million subscribers can they count on being able to call someone, and that's through sheer networking and mutual interest.
Yeah, I think that's the word, is like this lack of recourse is frustrating, because I don't want to go delving off into my own issues, but I was demonetized for 6 months on YouTube, I don't know if you remember, there was this thing that happened February last year, and it was like a bunch of lefty creators got demonetized for harmful content. And I was caught up in that. A bunch of the bigger creators, it was reversed, but mine wasn't. I didn't really know. I was only like a 10,000 sub YouTuber, right? I had no recourse. I didn't know what to do. And I just think because it's somewhat personal to me, and I appreciate the comments on this, because I think some people just think like, oh, well, they can do what they want, and so on and so on. I just think, well, sure, to a degree, but like, let's also just make it fair for creators too, right? Like,
yeah, we're seeing a trend towards less less supportive relationship, more, what's the word, precarious work, more precarious work. Everyone's got a job for a few months and then it goes away.
yes,
You need to get a new job. It's a treadmill type situation, which causes a lot of stress. And that's the norm in one of our most flourishing areas of culture, which is streaming video and people making their own videos, making their own contents, and making their own shows. And so I think there should be some normalization of relationships between the employer and the employee, even if it is precarious work by its nature.
yeah, sure. No, I agree with that. Okay, that's fair enough. Okay, and yeah, I mean, I guess the final. I was just saying to chat as well. If you've got a question or criticism, I'm not sure. You've kind of covered a lot of stuff, and I think chat generally liked it. But if you do want to ask anything, hop in agreement. I'll check. Put a question into chat if you're a bit shy, and I'll ask it. But yeah, obviously we move on now to the final part, and he's got these millennials that he's doing, and he's still doing this weekly show, and he's got a kind of loyal viewership of a few thousand viewers, it seems. So yeah, that's that, I guess, isn't it?
Yeah.
Do you think he's going to continue on? Like, has he got many more legs to go?
I wonder what he'll do in the future. He's not going away. He's got this audience. I wonder if he'll start making content which is entirely non-political, and I wonder what that would look like.
Oh, actually, that's one thing I wanted to check. So, I don't know if how much you've seen of his new content. Is it the same points of view? Has he shifted? Is optics concerns come into play? Like, what's going on?
Yeah, that's important. Thanks for asking. Because when I started researching this film, I started with the newer stuff because I thought these films I've made, the Troll trilogy, I'm a Cuck, Munted Random, Whovian Woes, they were all made in the pandemic. So to finish off the trilogy, I thought I would do a sort of Diary of the Plague Year, but through an alt-right perspective. And so my original plan was to take his more recent work, sort of post-scandal, and to sort of just tell a story of all the things that happened during the pandemic. To answer your question, since the scandal, since coming back with Millennial in 2020 and starting this weekly Ask Me Anything show, he has shifted slightly from talking about racial politics the majority of the time to talking about New World Order type talking points. That is the Great Reset. He's a proponent of that. He's, obviously a COVID vax skeptic. He thinks things like Davos are a place where liberals come to decide the future of Europe. And he's convinced that such organizations are run by Jewish people and that they want the worst for what he would call the native European population. So that's not gone away. It's just shifted focus slightly.
Okay, sure. No, that's interesting. Yeah, and it's funny how a lot of these people have moved from... And this is where I think your point about the chasing of audience kind of comes in too, because it's like you can predict, oh, you're alt-right, oh, what are you, like anti-vax, COVID fucking conspiracy? Yeah, oh, you are? Okay. And it's like there's this pattern where they follow this predictable path through political discourse, because that seems to be where the viewers go, right?
Yeah, another example is, say, Bitcoin and NFTs. For Millennial 2021, Colin had his own NFT. I think he sold it for a cool few thousand.
Jesus.
Yeah, so he was moving with the times and moving where the audience is. And I think it can be overstated, but there is like a cliche that's valid, that a lot of these people who are on the fringes of politics are also on the cutting edge of money with Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. and generally have the same sort of manosphere politics about gender relations, the same dismissive attitude towards feminism. And I see it as one journey. I see the Troll trilogy as looking at a cultural shift with a particular generation, my generation.
Okay, so I've got a few questions from chat. What's your opinion of dogwarts? We don't need to get into that now. We'll skip that one. This person really liked your documentary. They were wondering two things. What were your thoughts on whether it's responsible coverage? Like, do you even feel it's relevant? Namely, number one, there's two here, so I'll go the first one. The aesthetics were so nice, got me worried if to some people it might come off as glorifying or valorizing. What's your response to that?
Well, I had a dissatisfying exchange with someone from an anti-hate charity. I was trying to flog my film to them and say, hey, would you be interested in promoting this, retweeting? And they said that they worried about this just from the trailer. I made a little trailer, and in the trailer I said, the alt-right in his own words. That was like the tagline. And from this trailer, he kind of got the impression that I was, in a perverse way, trying to get us to sympathize with white nationalism, and that even if I had good intentions with that the effect might be just that I'm propagating a message I don't believe in and that I disagree with. But I was very conscious of this from the start, so I tried at each point to show both sides. The side where this is a real thing, the alt-right movement is a serious movement and it's going somewhere. On the other hand, just drawing back and showing the human being just recording themselves in front of a webcam and being as foolish as we all are. So I hope that answers the question. I tried to portray both sides so that they would create some comic relief every now and again when we pull back and we see it's just a human being we're talking about after all.
Yeah, no, sure. I think that, I mean, like I say, there's points where it's like I'm coming at this from my approach as like, but like, I look at it, I think, oh yeah, I understand how he came to be. Like, I get this, right? Like, he's not like an fundamentally evil person. He is a product of his circumstances, as we all are. And there's probably an alternative universe that exists where Colin Robertson is a bread tuber. Right, through a different series of events. He would hate
that. He would hate that, but I actually wonder if that is true. Yeah, if he was a little bit younger, born in a different generation, and he missed the alt-right by an inch.
Zoomer Woes.
I think what we all want is recognition for what we're good at. And when you're on the dole for 10 years, it can just feel like the world's passing you by entirely. So I feel like the validation he found in the alt-right was very psychologically potent. And that validation could have come from anywhere, really. Could have come from a job offer. Hey, Colin, we loved your CV. Please work for us. And he might have found recognition in that way.
And the second part of this is the alt-right is a bit dead for the mainstream YouTube audience. Maybe it's problematic to have a who's who compiled in one video for easy reference.
Is it problematic to have a who's who in one place?
I mean, I don't think so. I think that, I mean, I'm a bit biased though, because I'm like, I followed this at the time and I know a bunch of these people. So I had a little trip down memory lane. But I mean, I don't know. Maybe if the person wants to respond to that, but yeah, I don't personally think it's a problem. But yeah.
I don't mean to be defensive. I just don't really understand what the problematic part is.
Sure. I'm not a fan of the word problematic either, honestly. Okay, let's move on to the next one. So what's your opinion on Andrew Tate?
I learned about him just when everyone else did, about a week ago. I was told his name by an alt-right personality I was talking to about the film. So this wasn't a week ago, this was a few weeks ago. And he told me, your film's coming at a good time, what with its section about the women and so on, because did you hear about this alt-right guy being exposed, Andrew Tate? And I said, no. And he told me about him. And it was strange to me. He was all right, but he was loving the drama that was coming. And he was loving the content that was about to come, because he's a content creator, streamer. And I just see it as yet another example among many, many examples I've seen of the alt-right eating its own. And
Yes.
Andrew Tate is such
I
a
know
non-entity
why.
to me.
Okay.
He was on Celebrity Big Brother. That's kind of like
Sure,
the extra special
sure.
spice. I don't watch Big Brother. I don't watch Celebrity Big Brother. So he was a completely new name for me. But I see it as part of a pattern of the alt-right eating themselves for content once
Interesting.
they're a bit long in the tooth and they're fair game.
That's really interesting, actually, because I know that the reason he gets a lot of criticism from the alt-right is because he presents himself as a godly Christian man, but he set up a sex worker business. And that's like...
The hypocrisy of the, I mean, it reminds me a little bit of Roosh himself, Roosh V
Yes.
of
Yeah.
Return of Kings, who
Yeah.
very hypocritically turned into a Christian. And of course, Nick Fuentes does this as well, portrays himself as a man of God. And I had a Christian upbringing. I went to a C of E school, and I feel offended on behalf of Christians. I'm agnostic or whatever. I don't go to a church, but I have a lot of respect for Christian people, what I see as true Christian values, and I am very offended on their behalf because all the good people I met growing up and who taught me and who did all the bake sales and stuff, they have nothing to do with this zealotry and hypocrisy. Saying love your neighbour on the one hand, but then saying on the next that women are born to fulfill a certain role for men.
Yeah, yeah. Maybe picking and choosing certain parts that benefit their broader political ideology, it seems, sometimes.
Yes, I do think so. When it comes to Christianity, a lot of picking and choosing.
So, Creeman asks, do you believe there's any level of monopolization that can be achieved by a big tech platform in their area? Say, for example, YouTube or video, at which regulation on what they can and can't censor becomes justified?
Yeah, like Google, for example, that's not a platform, but Google came about and it became the standard, and Google, the company, has lived off that, has dined off that for so many years because there's no place in the market for something to replace it. It's like a train line. Once the train line is set, then you're playing the rules of that game. So I think if YouTube is going to last another decade, and it's been over 2 decades then, in 2030, then we do need to start seeing it as like train lines. There should be some rights for individuals. And this is contradicting myself, but I think it's a complicated question. So please allow me a contradiction.
Sure. Yeah. This is something that I struggle with as well, to be honest with you. And yeah, it is a very complicated, difficult issue. And because the thing is like, I don't think I ever want to be in an age where, you know, indecent images of children or ISIS beheading videos are just there on YouTube.
Yeah.
Right? Like, that's crazy to me. And I appreciate you maybe don't know much about the Andrew Tate aspect and he's kind of a non-entity to you. But, you know, I think that that's maybe an example where are we getting to the point like we spoke about earlier, where these platforms are getting a bit bold and they're kind of making these decisions without kind of justifying it. And, you know, maybe we do end up in a situation in 10 years' time where there is more regulation. It's like, look, you're too big. You know, you can't, there isn't anyone else that can chip into this market now. So we're going to have to say, you know, you have to have more lenient policies that allow more content on because you've become too restrictive. Like, maybe that could be a possibility.
Yeah, I hope some sort of progress is made so that creators are treated like normal employees who are working a day job, and they have recourse to address problems that are perhaps caused by trolls, caused by their enemies, instead of letting trolls win in every case.
Yeah. Okay. So let me see what else we've got. Another universe where the documentary is on Chud and Colin is doing this stream. I mean, yeah, that's a possibility for sure. I mean, I think we're probably a similar age. So I think this is in response to you talking about the alt-right eating their own. And it says, how is any of this specific to the alt-right? BreadTube does this too.
Okay, well, touche, chapeau. That's definitely a good point. A lot of what you see in the documentary isn't those people over there. It's us. It's how we act in our communities. And when there's people talking behind the scenes, there's all kinds of, and there's a public-facing aspect to any movement, then there's going to be a sense in which people utilize that as a weapon. that audience that's going to believe whatever's said. And the left certainly eats their own.
But the thing is like I see where Kuhn was coming from in saying that. I think one interesting thing that this documentary really highlighted is I feel like we sometimes get to the stage where it's like, well, it's the left eating their own again, and it's like, well, hang on a sec, what about the fucking right? They do it too, but they seem to get like disregarded, and it's like, but they do this shit as well. It's not a political thing; it's a human thing. It seems, right?
Yeah. From my perspective, having followed mostly the alt-right, the far right side of things more than the far left side of things, I see it as more of a far right problem. But that's counter to received wisdom, as you say.
How so?
Well, you were saying that it's generally lefties who are considered fractious, like the Judean People's Front, the People's Front of Judea, that old joke. But I would say now, with the example of the alt-right to hand, it could be said to be even more prevalent on the right. Right just never had the same kind of subcultural movements as the left until our age.
Sure, because the thing is like I remember recently. I guess what I'd say is I feel sometimes that because the left has some level of social power, like a lot of these companies are at least on the face of it progressive and have got progressive TOS.
I would agree with that.
It feels like it's more public and it's more obvious when they do it, and it's putting pressure on Twitter, YouTube, whatever to do something. Whereas, like some of this stuff I didn't know about Millennial Woes, and it's like it almost happens imperceptibly behind the scenes where you don't see it. So it's not as obvious, maybe. I don't know.
Right, the arguments that go on, the way people fall out with one another, it's all hidden from sight. What you get as an audience member of the alt-right is just all of a sudden, this guy's a terrible person, he's been kicked out of the movement, this is why. It's almost like a show trial.
Yeah.
That's a quick way of saying what I was trying to say earlier. A lot of the time, there's conversations behind the scenes, someone's picked out, and then there's a show trial in front of the streaming audience in order to justify that ousting of so-and-so. The same happens on the left.
Yeah, okay. Right, let's see if we've got anything else. I think that might be it. With the amount of debate coming up with the new generation of extremist content creators from any side, what lessons do you think we can learn about the 2010s to stop bad ideas from turning into another Charlottesville or a mosque shooting?
Great question to finish on. I think these movements are not sustained on good ideas. I think that they're sustained by the sense of community people have. And people find community amongst similar-minded people, in this case, about their antisocial views of society. That is to say that when people get together because they all equally hate society, they're not going to be getting on well. And to the extent that they find a community in there, they can only stay part of that community by fitting more and more into the ideal of that group. These terrorist attacks that happen when these shared communities become small and ever more radical because the members of that group identify more and more exclusively with that group as opposed to society. And the antisocial beginnings of that membership result in a logical conclusion, which is to attack society. And so I think that terrorist attacks that come from the internet should be seen as having antisocial roots, and there should be attempts to reach out to people with antisocial ideation at a young age, because it will be expressed in violence towards society if they can find a support group that would lead them to the logical conclusion, that ideology. There you go.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I've heard some lefties say we should just kill all the Nazis. Do you not think that's a
I do think maybe listening to them at the right time and talking to them at the right time could prevent Nazis from existing. So you could kill them in that way.
So kill them with ideas, basically.
Shoot an idea into their head when they're young.
Okay, no, I like that. Okay, no, that's interesting because, you know, I don't know actually what like where you land on the political spectrum precisely, which is fine. We don't need to get into that. It's just funny that it seems so controversial to suggest that, hey, these people that have got these antisocial issues, maybe we should just try reaching out to them and talking to them. It's like, it seems so controversial and bold to say, but it's like, that seems like the solution.
Yeah, I mean, in the end form, they are very objectionable to people. People have a disgust reaction to them, and so it's hard to remember that they're just a human being like you or me. I think it sounds so milquetoast, but I do think that kindness is what kills hate.
Okay. No, I like that. That's good. So we'll end it there, I think. The final thing I will ask though is, do you have any other projects lined up that you want to talk about?
Oh, thank you. Yes, I would. I'd like to advertise that I will be making a series of Limmy live stream edits. That's the Glaswegian comedian and live streamer on Twitch, Limmy. He's done some really funny playthroughs of some of my favorite video games, and I'd like to do a series of edits of those playthroughs to cut out all the extraneous stuff and just include all the quality content. So Limmy fans, watch out for my channel and subscribe. That's Liam Porter, the channel name.
Okay. Well, I've put your link in chat. Hopefully we get some people across to you. And yeah, I really enjoyed the video. Thanks for coming on. And yeah, it's been great talking to you.
Been great talking to you. Thanks so much.
Thanks.
Have a nice night.
Pleasure. You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.
That was a great conversation. I really enjoyed that. What do you reckon, chat? I thought that was great. I've got a good listen, in terms of feelings, I feel wonderful right now, okay?